Hi, welcome back to the podcast School of Love, where we want to help you create a parent child relationship with your kids where you can talk about anything, especially sex. And today I invited Benjy Uyama, and we're talking about courage in parenting. This is a beginning of a 5-part series where we're going to talk about each high noon virtue. And today it's about courage. And we talk about what does it mean to have courage in parenting, and especially in having these conversations about sex. Because let's be honest, we do need some courage. I think a lot of us are doing a lot of these things for the first time and taking a few steps further than our parents did. They probably also needed to have some courage in their conversations with you. And so how can we bring that courage even further and deepen that conversation and overcome any kind of fears that are blocking us from having this actually very useful conversation with our child, a useful, loving conversation that will actually deepen our relationship and help their future. So I hope you enjoy this podcast and find something that helps you have a few more steps in towards courage. Hello, welcome to the podcast School of Love. And today I'm here with Benjy Uyama. And
Hello.
Benjy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to have you here. And Benjy is the High Noon marketing director and probably even more proudly a father and blessed man. For how long have you been blessed?
14 years. 14 years.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So you're my senior.
Is that right? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so. I guess so.
Yeah, I'm at
Yeah.
12.
But you're at 6. You've had 6 children, right? 5.
5. So,
Okay.
and 4 on Earth, 1 in the
Yeah.
spirit world. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And do you have 3 kids?
Mm-hmm. Yep. 3 children. There's 9, 7, and 2 years old.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. And today we're talking about courage in parenting. We're going to be talking about each of the high noon virtues in a podcast series. And so, yeah, I think, Benjy, parenting takes a lot of courage. What do you think?
I would say so. Doesn't just happen without a little bit of fear, right? Yeah, it's definitely I've been thinking a lot about this word courage. It's actually my favorite, personal favorite of the 5 high noon virtues, because it is probably the one that usually is associated most closely with fear, and rightly so. And I think another word of saying courage, people usually will be synonymous with fearless. But actually, I think that fearless is not courage. Fearlessness is not courage, because fearlessness implies that you're not afraid. But courage implies that you are moving forward towards a destination or a mission, regardless of the fear that might be felt. And to the same extent, the word bravery comes to mind as well. So yeah, Amelia, it's like, I mean, just talking about courage in parenting brings up memories of having our first kid when I was 21 years old is when we first conceived, right? I was blessed in marriage when I was 18. Amazing 18-year-old person that I was, totally ready to take on the world, as we all are. No, not really. And then, having our baby when I was 21, and then he was born when I was 22. Like, I don't know if you remember just it's like so scary. Just first kid, at least you can compare like the first and the 5th kid is
Yeah.
like, is night and day in terms of like the fears and stresses of
Yes.
like, what am I doing? I remember
Yeah.
reading books about like co-sleeping. Should you sleep with your kids? Should you not sleep with your kids? Should you feed them soy milk? Should you feed them oat milk or whole milk? It's like endless things to figure out in parenting. And going, taking my wife to the hospital and delivery. It was just so much anxiety, endless, just staying up nights, night sweats and all that. And but I will say, Amelia, at the end of this, well, I guess almost 10-year journey of being a parent, I do believe that I have become stronger with my courage. And I've seen more and more of it as being a muscle that's developed rather than something that you just have. And I often think of people that we equate to usually of being the most courageous would be, people that are, fighting on the front line, right? Going to war, for example. And I realized that the people that are fighting for their country, they're not courageous because of who they are. It's because they're taking action in the face of fear. That's what makes them courageous. And we often like to see is like, oh, he's just courageous. She's just courageous. She's just brave. That's how they are. It's like, no, they're courageous because of the actions they take. It's because they're fighting war, even though it's scary. Of course it's scary. Of course parenting is scary. Of course marriage is scary. But despite that, you're still going to do it because you believe in something, you believe in a mission. That takes courage. That takes faith. And that is a muscle that's developed. So I would say that in my current journey as a parent, I have noticed, I guess I've gotten better at noticing when I'm afraid. And usually when I notice I'm afraid, it means that some kind of action needs to be taken because there's a reason I'm fearful, right? And so just an example that I shared before on the Heinen podcast is there's this one point, like about a year ago, my son wanted to go fundraising. Have your kids ever done something like that? Like sold stuff around, like
they've tried unsuccessfully in front of our house, but
yeah,
not
yeah,
really like fundraising.
exactly.
But
Stuff like that, right? Like in the States, at least, is a common image kids have of selling lemonade like outside their
right.
house. Anyways, my son wanted to sell bracelets that he was making. They're called rainbow loom, just rubber band bracelets. They're pretty intricate and beautiful. And he's been making this for a few weeks, right? And he comes to me when I come back from work. He's like, Papa, I want to go around our neighborhood and sell these, right? And I was like, okay, why? He's like, I want to make money. And I was like, you want to make money? And he's like, yeah, I want to learn how to make money. I want to fundraise, because we talk about fundraising, in our house sometimes, tell stories, me and my wife. And he's like, I want to fundraise and learn how to fundraise. And then I immediately had this fear antenna go up in my mind. I'm like, I was trying to make all these reasons why he shouldn't do this, right? And I was like, oh, it's late. It's people are going to bed. They're just kids are going to sleep, and why don't we just sell bracelets at church on Sunday to people that we know are going to buy them, right? And so I was noticing that I was making up all these excuses for this little boy that just wanted to learn how to sell and make some money, right? And so what is that? It's fear. I was being afraid. I was being afraid of, my son being rejected, about him having a bad experience. I was afraid of the neighbors thinking weird things about us, like we were annoying or something. And then when I noticed the fear, I immediately stood up. I was lying on the sofa, and I immediately stood up. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I afraid? So I stood up, and I was like, kids, we're going. So I grabbed my son and my daughter. We went outside, and I just like, go fundraise, go figure it out, And I just stood on the road and just watched them. Like, I didn't go with them to the houses. It was like, you got it, you'll figure it out. And they did it for an hour, and they had such a blast, and they made quite a bit of money, actually, because there's just two cute kids selling around the neighborhood. And so for me, it was an important kind of memory and pinpoint in my life, because I realized that's what courage is. It's noticing when you're feeling fear and noticing that internal dialogue, and then standing up and doing something, because there's a reason I was afraid. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, why would I let my fear of my son having a bad experience, or how my neighbors are perceiving me, get in the way of him having a lifelong lesson and experience of learning how to sell stuff? And I was like, I'm not going to be that dad, and I'm never going to be that. So I let him do it. And he made, pretty good money. I think $18 in 1 hour, US dollars.
Nice.
And I was like, son, and my daughter went with him, 7-year-old girl. And I was like, let this be a lesson. Like, if you work hard and are fearless, you can make money anywhere. Like, you can bring that skill anywhere you go in life. And by the way, they're like, at the time he was 8 years old, and he made more than minimum wage here in the US in one hour. And I was like, that's a good life skill. It like breaks a belief for people. It's like, you don't have money, just like make stuff and go sell it anywhere. So anyways, I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, it's like you were talking about your parenting journey, how it began, and having the sweats. And yeah, I also remember also just this moment at the hospital. Like in Germany, you have to register at the hospital before the baby's born. And then you sign this paper, like, I'm responsible for this future baby. And for me, that was just kind of like, wow, I'm responsible for a human being. Kind of this moment of just, yeah, even deeper realization, of course, even much before then, I was um, just also kind of, yeah, getting over these worries, trying to convince myself, yeah,
Yeah.
um, I'm gonna do it. I mean, of course, that's why you're a team, right? You have your spouse to work together, and my husband really helped me to just convince me, you're gonna be great, you're gonna do it,
Mm.
be a great mom. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and yeah, I like what you said about courage is not just being fearless, because I mean, fearless, is anyone ever really fearless unless they're
Well,
just like
they're called psychopaths, and
psychopaths? Yeah,
they
they're
jump off
numb.
buildings, and they have no impulse control whatsoever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're numb people who maybe just, I don't know, maybe drunk or yeah, they don't even feel that fear, right? But courage is
Mm.
really taking it in and, like you said, taking a step of action. And yeah, in the past year, I've been trying to notice like what's uncomfortable for me and how can I overcome these little fears. Like,
Mm.
I'm not like big on really steep slides. And at indoor playgrounds, I've been trying to take that on a bit more with my kids. Kids sometimes they're even more courageous than us
Hmm.
adults. Um, yeah, but then when it's really involving your kids, like you said in this fundraising example, um, then I feel like we even have even more of these worries. And yeah, I mean, I know it does come from good intention, like it's generally
Mm.
love for our child. Um, but yeah, then it's kind of you have to come to a point of navigating like, how much is it just worrying or staying in a comfort zone? And how much do I need to just, yeah, take
Get out of the
action?
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Mm. Yeah, it seems that fear is almost necessary, right? But
Hmm.
also, to what extent does it get in the way of what needs to be done, we want to do, you know? Mm.
And so, especially when so particularly in tackling the or even guiding our children to God's intention for sex, I feel like this especially is where a lot of parents need courage. Um,
Hmm.
because I mean, it is something new for a lot of us. I think a lot of us did not have our parents really guiding us on the long term towards a healthy sex life. It was really either this one-off talk or nothing, hoping that you learned something at a workshop.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, having this courage just to even start this new thing of having these conversations with our kids about sexuality.
Mm.
Has has that come up in your parenting?
Yeah. Well, I'll say first of all, from the perspective of my parents and a lot of our parents who, you know, kind of grew up in a generation where it was just a different ball game, like sexuality. Like my parents would leave me in a hotel, like with unlimited access to like cable TV for like for like hours on end, going to conferences and stuff, and they would leave me in the hotel room, right? It's like they didn't know. They don't know that there's basically borderline porn on cable TV. They don't know this stuff. But now, you know, we're a little wiser. But I do think it's not just ignorance in our parents' generation. It's also there was a lot of fear, and I think especially we're both parents that have kids and we're talking to them about sexuality. It's it's easy to judge and point fingers at our parents, but it's also we have to recognize that there's reasons that it was scary for them to talk about this stuff. It's there's reasons, very very deep seated uh, reasons that people are afraid to talk about sexuality, and that's okay. Like, let's say that off the bat, it's okay to be afraid. And I think that's a really clear message we're getting to here. But it's not really okay to let unnecessary, unfounded fears get in the way of raising godly children, right? Like if that's really what we're here to do is raise children and pass on something that's beautiful to our legacy and our lineage, then we cannot let fear get in the way of what needs to happen. It's not acceptable. It's completely unacceptable. And so I understand the fears that a lot of our parents have. Um, but also it's not excusable to let fear stop us from talking to our kids about things that are important. And so that's, I guess, the preface I want to say about how I'm talking to my children about it, because I'm also fearful. I'm afraid. I've noticed to just bring up things like attraction or crushes or sexuality, and I'm noticing that it's hard for me to talk about stuff. And I kind of notice when I'm talking with Hito and my wife about, our sexual relationship, or about, sexuality in general, I notice that I'm trying to kind of say it in a way that is understandable for them, or I'm a little nervous to say in front of them. And so I'm noticing these things in myself. Like I have certain weight or heaviness that I'm putting on sexuality that ultimately is not really helpful for kids, because they subconsciously learn, if everything's so heavy and weighted, then they subconsciously learn that they can't talk about this stuff because it's too heavy, it's too weighted. And so I guess, in the theme of fearless or courage, I've been afraid to talk about it, but I also, like I said, I'm developing this skill of noticing fear and then just doing it anyways. And so, like, for example, when I'll pick up my son from school this one time, and on the way back home in the car, I will just talk about sexuality, right? Or crushes, or some experience that I've had in my past, right? And we talk about things like my childhood experiences or trauma, or difficult sexual, experiences, or exposing myself to porn and masturbation when I was young. And so I'll kind of in doses talk about this stuff with my kids. And then when my son, or when they want to know more, they have questions, which sometimes kids do, then I'll kind of go deeper little by little, instead of just dumping everything at one time. I think there's some wisdom to meeting kids at where they're at in terms of their intellectual and emotional understanding about things, right? And I know some parents like to kind of go straight to the like vulgar, not vulgar, but like completely crass vocabulary about sex and sexual organs and stuff and all that. I like to make it more like childlike and more understandable for kids. And then if they have curiosity or they ask questions, and then I'll kind of go a level deeper to that than that. And so that's kind of how I'm approaching it. But I am noticing the fear as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think um, like the five virtues, courage, I think it always comes right before you're honest, right? Because you have to be courageous to also be honest with other people. And yeah, in this case, in having these conversations with our kids, um, we are taking a step towards being very honest, um, and becoming these trustworthy people also for our kids, right? Because, there are these other stories you can tell, a stork or birds and bees or whatever.
Mm.
But that's just, yeah, that's kind of like the comfort zone version, or um, yeah, I'll just protect my fear kind of version. Um, but yeah, this courage to really be honest, um, that, yeah, that's what it
Yeah.
takes to have these conversations, but also being also honest with ourselves, I think.
Mm.
Where am I at right now? Because yeah, like you said, it's okay to be afraid. We are all afraid of something, and these conversations are new for most of us, and so that's um, we're going to be afraid of it. But then, yeah, like you said, we can't let that stop us. And so, yeah, yeah, I think I had this sort of um, this wake up call of just being honest with myself when I started this job.
Mm.
And yeah, it, Uncle Dave, he asked, like, so how much have you really spoken with your daughter about pornography? And I was just like, actually, I haven't really spoken about it. Like, I've been kind of assuming she's been well protected, and um, yeah, so I had to be honest with where I was at. And I think a lot of parents are like me. They're just kind of hoping that our kids are protected and so
Mhm.
on. But yeah, I think there is just a much better way where we can be much more intentional with this courage in taking initiative in these conversations with our kids.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you've talked about this previously, right? But how did the conversations go since you started?
They have gone well. I mean, maybe surprisingly or not surprisingly. I mean, I know my kids. I actually don't know. I think it honestly it was just simply fear stopping me, and also just not knowing what what is what they need right now. And um yeah, and also just thinking I need to I don't want them to know that the world is kind of evil. But I've realized better that they know so
Mm.
they know so they feel equipped and know what to do, you know. Um and I also remember so I told all my kids about pornography, and we've also talked about sex, and kind of as a whole family. But then I feel like conversations can kind of get lost. You don't know with everyone's attention span who's taking something in and who's not. And so I felt like, okay, I need to sit down with one of my younger ones and just talk to him about it. But there was a lot of fear because I was like, I mean, I have this preconception that, yeah, this is not a topic for young children. And so it was uncomfortable for me to just be in the mindset that this is okay. But yeah, I realized I can do this. And I spoke to my 7-year-old about it because, I mean, I realized I think it's important for him to know this because, he can read now and he can read the word sex. He's going to ask, if not me, he's going to ask someone, what does that mean?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it did take some courage for me to just have this really simple 2-minute conversation with him. But, and it went okay. But I know this is also something that we're going to keep talking about again and again and again because kids
Yeah.
forget.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how old is he?
7.
7. He's the youngest or the youngest boy?
He's the oldest boy. I have another
Oldest boy.
youngest.
Okay.
One. Yeah, he's 4.
Got it.
So yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm feeling right now is that I think a lot of parents that don't talk to their kids about sensitive subjects, they make a snap judgment and rationale to say that, oh, like, why should I talk about this? Because it kind of feels like doing it out of fear, if that makes sense. And I understand this line of thinking. This is why I'm bringing it up. Is like, why should I talk about sexuality or pornography? Because it kind of makes it like the big bad wolf in the sense that you're highlighting something because you're afraid of it, and that's why we're bringing it up. It's kind of like to help mitigate or to protect or to create a safety net around a subject. And I think for a lot of people that is the motivation, right? And that's how I felt for a long time as well, is that like I want to talk about pornography and get the books and because it's a way of protecting them. But actually, I don't think that is healthy, first of all, because it's still based in fear. I think a more heavenly way and Heinen way of talking about sexuality is noticing why it's hard to talk about this stuff and making the reason to talk about it, not because of fear, but actually because of love. And also, there should be nothing that holds us down as weight or shadows. There should be nothing that is too dark or too shadowy or too dirty, right? Like sexuality. For a lot of people, it's so dirty, and that's the reason that they can't talk about it. But for me, I want to talk about sexuality with my kids and with my wife in front of my kids, which is important, because I don't think anything should have a hold over me or my conversation or our house. There should be nothing that can't be said, nothing that is too dark or too shady or too secretive or too heavy that can't be talked about, right? And sexuality happens to be one of the, or if not the greatest point of shame and darkness in our faith or many faiths and family, religious or not. It just doesn't get talked about. Even though I might add, sexuality is one of the greatest influencers in our lives, in our culture, in our biology. Like, just think about that for a second. Attraction, how people look, how people dress, how people exercise, the way that people look at each other, how we feel emotionally, hormones, everything is leaning towards sexuality and sex. Everything. But we don't talk about it. That's wild. And I think Father understood this. Here's a guy, like, think about this. True Father was invited to political rallies to speak to hundreds and thousands of political figures, leaders, religious leaders, as a guest speaker, all right? This is not his thing. He's like a guest speaker. And what does he talk about?
Yes.
The most detailed forms of sexuality you can imagine that they didn't translate. I remember being at one of these rallies, and I remember one time when Father was alive, and I understood Korean because I'd studied Korean, and I could understand what he was saying, but the translator on stage wouldn't translate what he was saying. He was talking about the sexual organ. He was asking questions about their sex lives and that kind of stuff. And the interpreter on stage would refuse to say what he was saying. And he was just like the interpreter was crossing his arms, his mouth shut. And he was like shaking his head like, no, 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 no. This went on for like 20 minutes. I'm not kidding you.
And then you
Everyone was
stepped
like,
up and you translated for everyone, right?
absolute sex. And he kept saying these like absolute sex, sexual organ. And this guy was just cross. He was like, no, no. This went on for a long time. And your Father was getting visibly angry at this interpreter. He was like, say it, say it. And he was like, no, no, like this, right? I was like, oh, and everyone's like, what is he saying? Like what could Father possibly saying that this guy doesn't want to translate, And so, like, just think about that for context. He was invited to these rallies. People wouldn't translate it. Like, how much conviction it takes to be invited as a guest and then just be a complete wrench in the whole system. Be like, guys, we're missing a point. Like, let's go back to the basics.
Wow.
Let's go back to the core of the universe. That takes so much balls, for lack of a better word, like, honest to God. And he just did that his whole life. And then we don't think about how much he probably thought about it, how much he talked about it behind closed doors, how much he probably prayed about it, and all the times that it wasn't even translated, right? And so I'm using this as like a filler or context for, like, that's the kind of level of just openness is our goalpost. That's our standard. That's our example of what it means, And until we get to that point, anytime we're like, oh, I can't talk to my children about this, it's like there's something else that's going on. The reason that we're talking about this stuff with our kids is not because we're trying to shelter them from the world. Maybe that's part of it, yes. But it's really because, like, why not? Why not talk about sexuality with our kids? And if there's a reason, it's like, oh, there's something that's actually really impure and fallen about our relationship with sexuality, about stuff, about money as well. Is also a big point of shame and secrecy for a lot of people. Health is a big weight, physical weight is a big point of shadow and secrecy and shame for a lot of folks. And so, like, why not be able to talk about this stuff openly and honestly with our kids? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder, just makes me think of True Father, like, was he even thinking about courage, or was he just so set, like he wasn't even he was
Mm.
fearless at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you made a really good point that it's not just about sheltering our kids. It's really about, like, I feel like that's kind of, pornography has made this tipping point that
Mm.
we feel like, yeah, we have to shelter our kids, but it's actually kind of made this realization happen that we can actually have these conversations about sexuality in a much healthier way, and also build up this, just, yeah, a whole new connection through having give and take on this topic with our whole family. And in that way also shelter our kids, or it's not really just about sheltering, but it's even more about empowering them towards their own
Mm.
wonderful future sex life.
Mm.
And yeah, also just becoming like a private sex coach, right? Like, I feel like lots of people
Mm.
need those. And if you already build that up in your own family, this openness, then you have someone that you can talk to. I
Mm.
loved, we did this 24-hour live podcast, and there was this couple that came on, and so the Lowens, I think, are
Mm-hmm.
their last name,
Yep.
and so they their position was helping younger couples in aspects of any kind of struggles regarding sexuality in the beginning of their relationships. And I
Mm.
feel like, yeah, ideally, that's what parents could potentially do if we just build up this openness already from a young age. Um,
Mm.
and just keep it going throughout teenagerhood even more. I think this whole conversation actually needs to build up like a huge snowball and
Mm.
just kind of grow and grow, because it becomes more and more prominent in our children's lives, and
Yeah.
they get more curious about it, right? Because in
Mm-hmm.
the beginning it's just kind of like, oh, okay, there are boys and girls in this world, and they realize that first, and then they realize more like, oh, we look different, there are penises and vaginas, and then they realize, oh, babies, like, they must come from somewhere. And so that just kind of builds up more and more, and us parents are there to give them the answers, but then those things do become more emotional, like, uh, yeah, like you said, attraction, crushes, um, and so yeah, that's just the snowball kind of growing.
Yeah. Snowball. There's a concept that I like to visualize. It's called the theory of growth, which that is really helpful when raising kids. Is that everything that is good wants to grow. Everything that is good for the world, good for the planet, good for ourselves, good for our spirits, wants to grow naturally. And you don't really have to force good things to grow. So, an example would be like a tree. A tree doesn't need forcing to grow. If it's in the right environment, it has the support from the climate, the earth, and other trees, it'll grow naturally. You don't have to go and water it every day to grow a tree. But if you have an external force like a hurricane or somebody chops it down, then the tree is dead. But if you, apart from external forces, it will grow naturally. And I know that this is how humans are developed and designed by God. We will naturally, our children will naturally grow to the state of wanting to be in a relationship with a man or woman, to have children naturally. It's a natural part. And they will go that direction, and they will prioritize that because that's what allows us to grow, right? But there are certain hurricanes in our life that come through and uproot our trees and our lives and kids, that are completely unnatural outside factors, like porn is a giant form of a hurricane that can completely uproot someone's life and put them on a dark path. Things like phone use, the amount of time that people spend on the internet is absurd. It's ludicrous. It's horrendous. And social media is a form of a giant axe that's coming down and chopping down kids' trees because it's telling them you don't need marriage, you don't need family. Your number one priority in life is to make money, to get educated so you can have a good job or you can be attractive. All right? This is 99% of all media is telling this to kids, especially young kids. The stuff that they're consuming on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc. And so when we're talking about like influence in school, people talk about like, oh, I don't want my kids going to public school because the teachers are teaching them weird stuff. I'm telling you guys right now, it's not the teachers. Kids spend very, very little time with teachers actually, especially on a one-on-one setting. You should be worried about the fact that your kids are spending time with other kids that are spending most of their time on the internet. Think about that. And so it's not, I mean, yes, there are weird teachers out there, sure. And there are great teachers, but the reality is that teachers aren't as influential on our children as much as the environment of just being around other kids that are growing up in dysfunctional families and are spending most of their time playing video games and on the internet and watching porn. All right. Because they don't have parents like us. We're going to enforce some rules and stick to them and guide them and love them and talk to them and listen to them. And that's the majority of kids growing up. All right. And so I'm saying this because I think it's foolish to conclude that it's like a systems thing, where in reality, it's just like, look at the homes of normal kids these days. It's normal, accepted behavior, especially here in the West. Some countries are different, but especially here in America, it is normal human behavior to give your kid a phone during dinner at restaurants. That's acceptable human behavior. To give a 2-year-old or 3-year-old a phone while you're grocery shopping, to distract them. Basically to have unlimited access to the internet and YouTube because it's quote unquote good for them. It's YouTube kids, so it's therefore, it's ludicrous. It's therefore better and healthier because it's YouTube kids, right? And they're not thinking about the fact that YouTube Kids is designed to keep kids addicted and eventually get them onto YouTube, which eventually will get them into porn, right? So I'm just saying this all because we're all focusing on the wrong stuff that doesn't matter. People are all thinking like, oh, we got to go to the right zip code so we can have a good school environment. So we got to go to this church community because they have a great Sunday school. It's like, great, that's maybe factors into 5% of a kid's upbringing. But if we ignore the fact that parents, what kind of home environment they have, where they actually spending their time, most of the time is at home. Do kids go to sleep every night knowing that they're loved? You know what I'm saying? And this is what I prioritize. I'll just end on this. Every single night, Amelia, I have closing with each of my kids. Every single night. I do this. And if I'm busy for whatever reason, my wife will do it. But most of the time, it's me. I will lie with them and I'll ask them, what's your highlight and low light for today? And I'll just leave it open-ended. That's it. If they don't want to share, cool. If they want to talk about Pokemon or Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever they're into right now, Power Rangers is their new thing, we'll just talk about that. And sometimes I'll do this for 30 minutes, an hour. Sometimes I'll spend an hour with my son every night. Sometimes it's like 10, 11 p.m. and they're still talking about stuff. Now, why do I do this? Because I want my kids to know when they go to sleep, they're loved. That's it. That is the only reason. Because they sleep for like 8, 9, 10 hours sometimes, which is a huge chunk of their life. And when they're sleeping, I want them to have this in the subconscious of their mind. I'm loved. I'm loved by somebody. That's what I want them to know. And so I prioritize this in my life. I don't care how busy I am. I don't care if I'm traveling. I'll call them and be like, hey, how's your day? And it takes work, right? My daughter will share a lot. My son won't share a lot. He'll say something goofy or silly or insincere, and I'll just goof around with him. And sometimes I'll challenge him. Sometimes I'll push him. Sometimes I'll fight with him. But like, actually tell me about your day. He's like, oh, it was good. What do you mean good? What do you mean it's good? What's good? What about that time where your sister had a fight with you? Was that good? Was that? And he's like, no, that was actually, I was like, yeah, tell me about that. But I realized that the way to my son's heart is actually to share my own. You were talking about being honest with ourselves, right? Is to be honest with myself first. I was like, how was my day? What was my highlight and low light today? Which I don't think about often. But usually I'll share my highlight and low light for the day, and that'll open him up to wanting to share how he's doing, you know? And so That's just what I'm saying, because I realize that we're, as parents, as culture, we're so focused on the things that don't really matter, right? I was mentioning earlier about, do you drink soy milk or whole milk? Like, this is World War III for some parents. Some
Mhm.
parents really care about this. I don't know where you stand on the matter, but every parent has a freaking opinion about whole milk or soy milk or almond milk or whatever, co-sleeping or not co-sleeping, right? I'm like, does it really matter if our kids don't feel unconditionally loved ultimately? Doesn't really matter. No, it really doesn't, actually. And so we got to stop focusing on things that are frivolous and not of any value. I mean, to some value, but not if we're going to ignore the things that really do matter to us. Okay, that's all I want to say.
I love that. That's so beautiful that just this thought of falling asleep, feeling loved. That's so nice that you want to give that gift to your kids every night. Um, it's almost like this hypnotherapy. I am
Mm,
loved, and you're like there are hypnotherapies actually just saying to people, "I am enough," and it's basically to say, "I am loved," right?
mm,
Because people don't always feel that. Um, they just this there's this missing piece between them and God's love sometimes, or yeah, sometimes they don't understand the love that their parents are maybe trying to give them. But yeah, I think
mm.
that's a wonderful way to give that to your kids. And yeah, I
Yeah.
also really like your point about they spend the most time with us, our kids. And that's something that I've also been thinking about because, yeah, some of my kids have taken interest into books that have romantic stories also in them.
Hmm.
And for me, it's important that they just talk about them, just to so I know what they're reading, but also that
Mm,
they kind of through talking about it, they can also think, okay, is that realistic?
mm,
And for me, I just want them to understand and also build up a healthy vision of what is healthy romance and what is love. And
mm,
so yeah, there's that communication, but then of course a really important part is then what my husband and I are exemplifying in front of them. And so yeah, that's just something that we need to continuously invest in to make sure that we are having a really fulfilling, wonderful relationship as a couple because our kids see that so much. Um, and I think it just highly influences
mm.
their yeah, their dreams for a future relationship.
Yeah. I really like that point of using novels or books to as a way to teach, essentially, not just because you know that there are some parts in the books that are questionable, right, romantically,
Yes.
but you're also not saying like man, like we're banning all books by this author, but it's like, hey, let's use this as an opportunity to see the ideal and the not ideal, right? Like, you're a couple, you're trying to portray a vision or goal, and then books, media as a way to portray what's probably not so healthy, right? Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's great. I love that. I try to take that approach with movies, especially
Mm.
because like every movie you can. I mean, it's hard to find movies that are completely like you agree with everything, But yeah, I try to do that with things like Frozen or
Mm.
any kind of like princess stuff. I'm just like pointing. I always make a point to like point it out. It's almost probably annoying to my kids, and they're like, "Dad, they're just friends." I'm like, "Come on, like, why does why do they need to?" Yeah. Anyways, besides the point. Uh, yeah. Today I was walking around here in downtown Raleigh, walking to this office, and then I was just noticing a lot of college students because we have a college campus, right? And I was just like, it's really sad. It's just really the sexualization of people is really sad. I'll say that. And I was kind of getting down on myself. I was just feeling like, do I really want to raise my kids here in the Western world? Uh, I mean, I've lived in places like really remote Japan and in Korea, Of course, I've visited, different parts of the world. And so I have a bit of a comparison point. And I was looking around this area, like college town, America, and I was like, is this really where I want to raise my kids? Like in this culture, do I want them to be in this environment? Even though I'm actively trying to get them away from going down the route of like university. It's just my personal thing. You can talk to me later if you want, but I'm actively against like going down that route of them being one of these kids on college campuses. And I'm going against the route of them, all that stuff. But they're still growing up in the American culture. They're still watching American shows. They're still, hanging out with American people. And it's not about Americans necessarily. Like I'm American, right? But it's about just the prioritization of certain things. And then this morning I was just like, do I really want this for my family? I was like deeply in meditation and like journaling about this. Like, do I really want this? I'm still figuring out, to be honest, but my conclusion so far is that I don't want to run away. I want to face this world, and I want my kids to be stronger as a result of the environment that they're in. Yeah. I would rather they develop the muscles of how to say no and how to stand for what they believe in the face of a lot of degeneracy and pain, ultimately, a lot of pain that people are going through, and just to be able to stand their ground and be like, this is what I believe. And I think that is what, as a parent, I feel more intuitively is the right thing to do, especially in our, like in our faith. We are raising blessed children. We're raising kids that have not experienced this level of generational, like spiritual growth, right? We're talking about 3 generations of the blessing. And I've experienced it in my own life, and I've seen it in the people that I mentor, just generation by generation, how exponentially more that people are growing and becoming closer to God. And I think to just step back and run away from the world and be like we can't handle this sexualized culture and just go live in freaking the Middle East somewhere, which I'm tempted to do sometimes, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like go out in the middle of nowhere where everybody's, thinks like me. He's like young, married, and has kids. But I choose to stay in this country of America where most kids are having sex, right? 66% of college students are having sex in the US. And I choose to be in this culture where people are having kids later and later and getting married later and later, because I want my kids to be strong and I want them to have values that they cherish like I have. And because I grew up in the same place, the same state, North Carolina, that my kids are being raised. And I want them to be strong too, and to have fortitude in their own values that they can live by.
Courageous choice.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really relate to that. Like, yeah, I've also had those thoughts. Is this the right place? Um, yeah, also partly because in Germany you're not allowed to homeschool. Um, but yeah, I do think, I mean, that's also what we're doing when we tell our children about pornography. We're teaching them that there are these things that they can be stronger than. Like they don't need to just go with the flow like their other kids. And we're teaching them also what happens when you do go with the flow. And I mean, it's also sad, but they can then see lots of examples around them of what happens. Yeah. I mean, hopefully, eventually we can reach those people and help them too. But yeah.
Interesting. It's like kind of like a disease. You don't just ignore a disease and pretend it doesn't exist. You teach kids how to be strong enough to resist the disease.
Yes. The vitamin C, fresh
The
air,
health,
sunshine.
exercise,
Yes.
eating well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it's all around good for you, right? It's like, it's not just about not getting sick, but it's really staying healthy. That's what it really gives you in the end. It's also, it really fits to this whole
Mm.
not just sheltering my kids from a scary world, but empowering them to have a wonderful relationship with sexuality and knowing God's intention
Yeah.
in that direction.
Yeah.
And yeah, letting them grow into that and blossom in their own future relationship.
Mm.
Yeah,
That would be
nice.
amazing. That would be amazing.
Mhm.
How old is your oldest? Your daughter?
She's 11.
11. Yeah, my son is almost 10, and he's, yeah, becoming definitely more, yeah, curious, I would say, and sexually awakening, and I'm actively trying to celebrate that as much as I can, which is really weird to say. I'm just like, God, good for you, buddy. Like, this is amazing. Like, that's how I'm trying to approach it. I guess I'm trying to like trick myself into to like being super positive, but I'm just like, yeah, he's like, especially in the next few years, I was like, Kojin, like the next few years, you're gonna be so curious about women and girls, and it's beautiful. Like, it's awesome. Like, this is fantastic because this is what will drive you to be a man, to be a husband, to be a father, is your sexual drive. Like, it's amazing, and God gave it to you. Like, how many of us heard that growing up? Like, your sexuality is so cool. Like, it's so awesome, you know? That would have been a completely different story if we heard that kind of stuff from our parents, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think just the fact that you are involved, a part of it, I think that makes all the difference. That they don't feel alone, your kids or any kids.
Mm.
That's really important because otherwise either they feel alone or they feel ashamed. Um, they don't know who to talk to about body changes or feelings. And yeah, it's all hidden and never gets dealt with. So yeah, it's awesome that you can just be a part of it, celebrate all those things.
Yeah, likewise, Amelia. It's really nice that you're able to hold your kids' hands and bring them through this journey, right? It's kind of like a visual of the typical conversation about sexuality is kind of someone that just, like a parent that just pats their kid on the back and says, "Good luck," like, "Good luck with sex," and then they leave the house essentially with no guidance, as opposed to someone that's like, hold your hand. I'm by, like, we'll figure this out together. Like, every step of the way, as long as you're willing to have me hold your hand, I'm here, you know, and I'm with you side by side. And that's kind of the visual that I try to strive for with my kids, is they know that someone's holding their hand through everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this whole change, this is kind of a mindset that you have to take on, I guess. And I think I'm just wondering, what can we do for those parents who haven't had that courage yet, or just haven't realized yet the importance of this conversation or series of conversations?
Yeah.
Like, how can we help those parents who still are just so fearful at the thought of talking about puberty or crushes or anything
Yeah.
to do with sex with their kids?
Yeah. I would say that treat it as a muscle, like exercise, and just do
Mhm.
one thing. Don't jump straight to 300-pound bench press. Just do one
Yes.
push up. Start with one push up. And I think a good step would be talk to your spouse, right? If you haven't
Hmm.
already, talk to your spouse about it. Uh, and then also, I would recommend finding a way to talk about, you know, romance in a really easy way with your kids. Just like talk about a movie, like watch a movie together and talk about that. And importantly, if you notice the internal dialogue, that's really helpful and healthy, actually, because it's reasonable to be fearful. It's reasonable, but to notice it is the first step of being conscious of it, and then to recognize, like, oh yeah, this is the time where courage is needed. This is it. It's like you're going to war and you're fighting for your kids, and you're being called to the battlefield, and that's your time where you say, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to do this. Or you're going to back away. And I hope to God that people will choose courage over cowardice, because ultimately we can't really experience any of the high virtues if we're not willing to be courageous and notice that courage is needed in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to also just backtrack to what you said in the beginning. You notice the fear and you take an action step. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a huge one, but just some sort of action step. And then I feel like you're already conquering your fear in some way.
Mm.
So yeah.
100%. Yeah. I talk mostly with young folks who are getting married, right? Preparing for marriage and matching and blessing. And they are, yeah, there's so much fear that people have of just figuring it out. And so usually the people that succeed the most in terms of conquering fear, with courage, are the ones that just do something. Like, I'm just going to have a conversation with somebody, even if it's talking to my parents about this, like about this fear I'm having, or maybe it's, making a matching profile or something. It's usually one step. And because what I've learned in parenting is that it's the anticipation that's the most stressful of anything. And everything is scary until you do it for the first time. And then it's not scary anymore, or as scary. So the anticipation of giving birth to, or being a parent for the first time, is the most stressful part. And this is universally true for men, by the way. All men will agree with this. It's the anticipation of leading up to the day of the delivery, of like getting to the hospital, that's the most stressful. But as soon as like water breaks and baby's coming, we go into hyper gear and we just are like, we just know what to do. We're just like, all right, get in the car, we'll just go. There's not like, oh, like, what do I do? Most men are just like, all right, it's time. But it's always the anticipation that is the stressful part. And so for me, I've learned to kind of etch this into my mind, is if I'm fearful, it's actually not as scary as when it will actually happen. Mm-hmm. The same is true for like fundraising or witnessing. Before you go out fundraising in the van, that's when it's the most stressful and anxiety inducing. But as soon as you get out the door, it's like, oh, like, here we go. And in my stage right now, because we don't have teenagers yet, but everybody talks about like, oh, the teen years or so, whatever. And I remember like I was getting all fearful about teenagehood. It's like, oh, everyone's talking about how stressful and hard it is for teenagehood. But I realized the same principle, it's the anticipation of having a teen that's actually the scary part. But the reality is that kids are they don't just wake up and they're teenagers, right? It's a gradual process. It's a very gradual process. And we can be with them every step of the way. And so I'm going to liberate myself from this anxiety fear of the anticipation and just be like, okay, like, well, when we get there, he's going to be a teenager and we're going to deal with it. And I don't have to stress about it, because then I'm losing headspace and I'm living in the future. I'm sacrificing the present moment of being with my kids for some possible outcome in the future, which sucks. It's a miserable place to live that most parents live. It's fear of the future, fear of some possible outcome. And what happens is we're living in the future, or we're living in the past, and we're sacrificing just being with our kids right now and enjoying them. And I think that's what parents say when they're older and they say to you, oh, enjoy it while it lasts. How many parents say that? Enjoy it while it lasts. That is the saddest enjoy it while it lasts 5 words I've ever heard in my life. It's sad because you, whoever's saying that, have missed an opportunity. You are not present with your kids and you regret things. And that's just sad. It's like, oh, I wish, anyways. Okay. I'm done. I told Amelia I was going to be American on this episode.
You have to live up to what you said. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. So whoever is still fearful, then take an action step and don't live in that fear too long. That's what we were just saying. That's the most uncomfortable part, actually, is just staying in that fear and letting it grow. So take that action step, and small, bit by bit. Yeah, be there for your kids and have that conversation. That's what we want to say. All yes, right. Long conversation over life. So yeah, thank you, Benjy.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.